writers in this community. And one of them is sitting right over here, Chris Orcutt. Maybe you've read some reviews of this book, but there's much more to this than simply trying to guess what town he is talking about. It's really just a portrait of a community, and I loved it. Chris went to school here in Dutchess County, grew up here, so he knows what he's talking about. And without more ado, I think we should simply bring Chris up here and let him talk about this very delightful collection of short stories. Do you call it a collection of short stories?
No, I call it a novel.
You call it a novel.
And I can answer that later on.
Good.
It really is a novel because
It is, indeed.
The stories are all interconnected. So.
Good. Well, come on up.
All right. Thank you.
Pleasure to have you here.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ann, for that lovely introduction. Good morning. I'm Chris Orcutt, and I'd like to thank you all for coming. Before I do a short reading for you from my new novel, 100 Miles from Manhattan, I'd like to thank everyone involved in putting this festival together, including the festival committee, Merit Books, and the staff of the Millbrook Free Library, all the work that they do here. I'd also like to publicly thank my wife and muse, she's back there, Alexis, for everything she's done behind the scenes, both to put this reading together and to promote the novel. Finally, I'd like to dedicate this reading to a friend and fan who is going through a tough time right now. I'm going to be reading you a section of the chapter titled Wellington Trials. This is from the point of view of a New York City book editor driving through Wellington for the first time. He's on his way to see his lover, a young woman named Titania Hammersley, who's an equestrienne competing in the horse trials. I hope you enjoy it. Although I'd had several authors from Wellington over the years, including a former editor pal turned best-selling mystery novelist, not one of them had deigned to invite me to so much as a cocktail party up here. Creeping through the village that Saturday morning in a rental car, I passed a shiny aluminum diner and myriad antiques dealers, and continued on through a hamlet mysteriously called Rabbitsville, although I didn't see a single rabbit to warrant the name. From there, I followed sandwich boards pointing to Fox Hill. The road ribboned out in front of me over rolling green hills and miles of black wooden fence. The sky was a soft summer blue. In the hollows, pockets of thin fog hovered over the grass. The whole countryside had a vaguely mystical aura, like Mr. Darcy's Derbyshire. Most of the drive from Manhattan, however, had been tedious. Driving along the empty and wooded Taconic Parkway, still half asleep, I had started to question the wisdom of traveling 2 hours upstate for a young woman with whom I had done nothing but have inordinate sex, and that only in her favored cowgirl position. To be fair, we had managed to squeeze in a few substantial conversations about books. For a young woman of prodigious sexual appetite, she was surprisingly well-read, Chekhov's stories being her favorites. About technology, she embraced the useful, citing her automatic lights and a robotic vacuum cleaner that perpetually crawled around the apartment. And about lifestyles, she adored simplicity, bordering on the Spartan. Every room in her apartment contained minimal furniture and absolutely no knickknacks. But since those conversations invariably took place before or after sex, I considered them suspect and not representative of how we would relate under less sybaritic circumstances. For that reason, the weekend was a test, or as she had put it, a trial run for us. Of Of course, there was a chance she'd tire of me by Sunday evening, but I doubted it. When we'd kissed goodbye Wednesday night at the clock in Grand Central, practically making out in the withering gaze of the information booth clerk, she had clung to me like someone to a tree in a hurricane, gushing about the upcoming competition, the recent good weather, the soggy spring and how it would affect the course, the wide assortment of obstacles she had to jump, her rival riders, her private cottage on the estate, and how much her parents were going to love me. We kissed one last time at the train doors. She put her hand on my heart. Just so you know, you're the only guy I've ever taken up there. The only one, ever. The road began a long, steady climb, and in the field to my right, some riders trotted along the fence. When I reached the summit, a who's who of luxury cars and SUVs, intermingled with an ambulance and a Wellington police car, lined both shoulders of the road. I parked and followed other spectators, or guests of the riders, I presumed, down a path between two fences toward the warm-up area. For early June, it was hot, not even 9 o'clock yet, and easily 80 degrees. In a summer suit and pastel-striped tie, I was farcically overdressed compared to the people around me. But that was the brochure's fault. In the photos, everyone looked as if they were at the Kentucky Derby, so I had dressed accordingly. Out in the field, a rider approached a water jump, the horse cantering toward it at an angle. I consulted the map and the brochure Titania had given me. It showed this course, the cross-country course, as a giant loop, ending on the near side of a large copse of trees and beginning on the far side. An observation tower rose above the trees. There were people at the top, barely visible. The path I was on between the fences passed the cool-down area. A pair of riders, male and female, approached each other at the fence line. "Michael, how was she?" I pulled up at 17. "Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, it didn't feel right. I mean, she's fine, but it's still pretty mushy out there." "It is. You'd think that with all their money, they'd do something about the drainage. Anyway, how'd you do?" "Pretty good, I think. No penalties, anyway. Least Caprice isn't competing this year. Gun crazy, apparently. Spending all her time at the shooting club. What about Titania? Has she ridden yet?" "No, she's in the next grouping. Hopefully my time will hold up." Hearing another competitor mention Titania gave me a sadistic feeling of pride. The others were clearly afraid of her. The warm-up area sat in the shade of the trees. 4 riders and their mounts trotted around a small field as family and spectators stood beside the fence. Even though she was wearing a helmet, I picked out Titania immediately. She sat taller and steadier in her saddle than the others, plucking her horse, a glistening deep chestnut, into a canter. She rode in lazy circles, her face fiercely concentrated, until she noticed me and beamed. Wheeling the horse around, she jumped off before coming to a complete stop and ran toward the fence. I didn't know whether spectators were allowed in the warm-up area, but when I saw the elation on Titania's face, I didn't care. I climbed over the fence and she threw her arms around me and kissed me like we were alone in her Park Avenue bedroom. When she looked up at me, her eyes were soft and gleaming. "You're here." "I am." She tapped me on the behind with her riding crop. "And fabulously overdressed. Do you ever not wear a suit?" I pinched the sleeve of her polo shirt. "Yeah, what's this? I thought you'd be wearing one of those fancy jackets with an ascot." "You mean a cravat? Silly, those are for dressage, which was yesterday, in which I kicked ass in, by the way." "Jolly good show." "Dork." With a quick glance over her shoulder, she sprang up on her tiptoes and spoke hotly in my ear. "I want to show you the stables after. There's a certain pile of hay with our names on it." She kissed me again. "Gotta go, wish me luck." A man boosted her into the saddle. Good luck. Where do I go now? The tower. My parents and the other sponsors are up there, along with some of the delegates. Best view of the course. See you in half an hour, baby. Before I could get her parents' names, she trotted away to the far end of the field, stopping the horse several yards away from the other riders. I found the tower and climbed the stairs, 4 flights of them, and pausing on the final landing to dab my face with my pocket square. Then I took a deep breath, forced a smile, and continued to the top. 3 couples stood at the rails, along with a man and 2 women in matching crested jackets and straw plantation hats. The equestrian team delegates, I reasoned. A woman in an event uniform handed me a pair of binoculars and a glass of champagne. Who is your party, sir? I'm with Titania Hammersley. A tall, balding man with tufts of white hair on either side of his head swung around from the railing and eyed me superciliously. He tapped the arm of a woman beside him. The boyfriend. The woman was a dark brunette with alabaster skin. At first I saw her only in profile and was enchanted by her fine features. But when she turned to face me, and face me she did with her cool Slavic eyes, I felt as though I were seeing a living incarnation of Anna Karenina. Ah, yes, the book editor. It's a pleasure to meet you both. Peter Ford, John, Natasha. I shook hands with them. May I join you? Certainly. John stepped aside, creating space between him and his wife. Titania's first in her group. Should be starting any minute. I've been looking forward to seeing her ride. Natasha turned to me. These books you edit, what is the genre? Her accent was noticeable. Titania had told me that her mother was one of the original Russian mail-order brides. But until I heard Natasha speak, the fact hadn't fully registered with me. Fiction, literary. This includes romance, yes? Yes, Natasha, some. John's eyes flashed. What? No nonfiction? He threw his arms up, apparently forgetting he was holding a glass of champagne. Half of it went over the railing. Well, yes, a bit. How about ghostwriters? Know any? I was thinking of doing a book myself. Oh, what about? You know, this and that, my philanthropy, life lessons I've learned, business deals, that sort of thing. I sipped some champagne. If you don't mind my asking, sir, how did you earn your fortune? Well, it's inherited mostly. Tungsten. Excuse me, sir, did you say tungsten? For light bulb filaments. Natasha gazed out at the fields. Watching her, it was easy for me to see where Titania got her statuesque looks. I read many Danielle Steele. You could get me autograph? I don't know her directly, but an announcement blared over the loudspeaker. Next up on the cross-country course, Wellington's own Titania Hammersley, riding her stallion Gurov. I smiled at this homage of hers to the Chekhov character. The announcer continued. After her flawless showing in dressage yesterday, Miss Hammersley goes into today's competition well ahead of the field. Titania Hammersley, number 9, starts now. I put down my champagne and trained the binoculars in the starting area. How much do these ghostwriters charge? It varies, sir, but for a good one, which you want, I'd say $50,000. What? So what kind of advance could I expect? That's hard to say. Well, we can discuss this later. After some frantic searching with the binoculars, I found Titania and got her in focus. A buzzer sounded over the loudspeaker. She took off. The first half-dozen obstacles, either plain wooden jumps or adorned with flowers, she and Gurov cleared easily, sailing over them and landing cat-like on the turf with distance to spare. Once Titania successfully jumped a hedge-top rock wall, she leaned forward, gripping Gurov's mane, and whipped him into a full-blown gallop. Mud kicked up behind them. There she goes, the proud father said, rapping on the wooden rail. It's a done deal at this point. We crossed to the other side of the tower. I never see her so relaxed. What has relaxed her so? Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Natasha lower her binoculars and look me up and down. I continued to peer out at the course. Of the next 7 obstacles, only 3 were visible from the tower. A dry ditch behind a grassy mound, a water-filled ditch, and 2 rail fences in close succession. And to my untrained eye, she executed all of them flawlessly. Then she careened down a steep hill and out of sight, in equestrian dead zone, like a spacecraft during re-entry. "She'll come out over there." John Hammersley pointed at a wooden wall built into a gap in the hedgerow. 5 feet high, toughest obstacle on the course. After that, she'll be home free. I zoomed in on the wall. 2 small signs, one red, one white, formed guideposts for the wall, so the wall could be distinguished from the greenery of the hedgerow. The white signs had numbers on them. 17. I thought of the writer's comment earlier, that he had pulled up at number 17. And in barely the amount of time it took for me to gasp for breath, I was staggered by a sense of literary deja vu. Vronsky's disaster in the steeplechase. By the time the announcement came over the loudspeaker, I had climbed over a fence and was sprinting across the field to her. Thus the cliffhanger. Save the cliffhanger. I'll take your questions. Does anybody have a question?
These are all short stories then?
No, well,
they all connect
they
together?
started as short stories, and there were a dozen of them. And as I was putting the book together in its final form, I discovered, gosh, you have all of these stories about this one community, Wellington, and they just interlocked. They're just inextricably linked, because characters that appear in one chapter appear later on or are referred to in another chapter. And I call it a modern novel in that respect, because the tradition of pastoral fiction has generally been for a community, or, to tell the story of a time and a place. You think the classic example would be Pride and Prejudice, and many of the Thomas Hardy's works. The classic example has been to tell that story from the point of view of one person. So, for example, in the case of Pride and Prejudice, we see this story from Lizzie's point of view, Lizzie Bennet. I felt that in today's society, in a society of Snapchat, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, where everybody is a star or considers him or herself one, I felt that each person would want to be the star in their own story. And so that's why it's told in 10 points of view, so that you, the reader, aren't stuck with seeing this community from just through the eyes of one person. You're seeing it through the eyes of 10 different people, including a trophy wife, a single mother, a town doctor, a local Casanova, one of Ann's favorite stories. Well, you're going to have to read it to figure out all the rest of them. But does that answer?
Yes, that's
Okay.
a very interesting idea. I'm just wondering now, so then you don't have you don't really have one protagonist or one thing that happens in this whole village.
Well, the
that then in
protagonist,
end
you know who the protagonist
solved.
is? Wellington.
Yeah, well, that's what I was
The
wondering.
town is,
The town is
the main character.
Well, and so the confrontation of Wellington is the people that live in there. Is that their idea, that the whole conflict?
Well, there are conflicts between rich and poor.
Right.
There are conflicts between, there are townies, there are hilltoppers, there are celebrities. I mean, so you have all of these layers of conflict. But again, I didn't want to force the reader to have to see this community through the eyes of one person. I had this idea to write about a similar community 20 plus years ago when I was a reporter down here at the Round Table. It's my first job after college. And my thought at the time was to write the story of a community like this, and I'm saying, well, gosh, who would be the protagonist? Who would be the hero? Well, of course, it'd be the local reporter. I mean, the lack of vision that I had at 22. But I'm glad I didn't do that, because I think this is a richer experience to see the community from a number of different points of view. Yes?
I had several friends buy your book, and the funny part about it was that we actually communicated about the book afterwards, and I'm not going to say a lot about this one chapter in particular, but she had a different point of view of how the girl who met the gentleman that was into trains, how she felt, whether
Right.
she was upset or whether she
Right.
was elated, and that's why.
Okay, I don't want to give a spoiler, but there is one of the chapters involves a single woman trying to find romance, and a number of the stories or chapters end with morally ambiguous situations. So you the reader can come to some decision for yourself as to what happens next. Any other questions? Yes, Zach.
Do you ever feel yourself slipping into the other characters' points of view while writing the different stories?
Oh, well, we writers, absolutely. These voices are in our heads all the time. And yes, I mean, in a situation like this, I think there are probably some 40 characters in here, and I hear the voices of each one of them distinctly. So absolutely, sometimes, you're walking along and you hear the voice of Peter Ford or Natasha or other characters, Caprice. So absolutely, but that's, it's in the walking around, that's how you develop the characters. You're walking around, you're thinking about the characters, they start to grow on you, and then you see little habits, things that people do, and you're like, oh, that's good, let me ascribe that to one of my people. And you just stay observant to the way people walk, the way they talk, what they wear, and you gradually build the character that way. Yes?
What are you gonna write next, Chris?
Well, it's kind of a common belief among writers, and I tend to agree with it, that if you talk too much about what you're going to be writing, it becomes too cathartic, and you end up not writing it.
You're absolutely right. I just wondered if this particular town that you're writing about, this fictitious town, is going to inspire you to further stories.
If
Or whether you want to move to another.
Yeah, I've definitely moved to it. I mean, if this took off and people were like, well, where's part two? Like Dallas and what, Falcon Crest, a spin-off or something, Wellington and Goldsville or something. Yeah, maybe. But actually what I'm working on now is probably going to be more of a Romana Clef, which for those of you who don't know is a form of novel where you base characters on real people. To some extent, some people are real people, some people are just outright fictional characters, and base a story around them. So I'm thinking the next thing I'm working on is going to be a Romana Clef.
was interesting to hear you mention your job as a reporter on the Taconic newspapers.
Yeah, I stay in touch with him and Helen Meserve. I've stayed in touch with them over the years. They live in Maine now.
Right.
They were the editors at Taconic Press for many years. A very generous couple from New York City, and they bought a house for reporters to live in. So yeah, I really enjoyed my time. You know, Hemingway said of newspaper reporting, he said, you know, it can be good for a young writer as long as you get out of it in time. You know, and the reason he said that was he was making a remark about style, because the thing is, journalistic style is fantastic, but it can weld you into a particular way of writing, and he wasn't going to be welded into anything. Any other questions?
Do you think that journalism helped you? Hemingway was very sparse and very terrific that way. and
Yeah, I think
dynamic. Do you
I
think
think
that helped you?
absolutely. I think journalism was a help. One of the people that is going to be here today, Stu Shinsky, was one of my first editors at the Millbrook Roundtable. And the lesson I learned, not the Roundtable, I'm sorry, the Poughkeepsie Journal. And one of the lessons I learned from him, and he knows this, I came back from a city council meeting, and I was there, you know, the cub reporter, and I had all my notes, and I'm going to write this masterpiece of a story about we've got 20 minutes until deadline. I think I'm going to write, you know, a magnum opus about this city council meeting. And he's over at the terminal, over at the computer terminal, nagging me every 2 minutes for it. And I'm like, oh, I'm planning, I'm outlining. And he goes, Orcutt, I can't edit what I don't have. And it's a profound idea, and it taught me you've got to have a first draft. You're not going to produce anything until you produce a first draft that you can then edit. So he's going to be here later, and if you get a chance, go down to the Bennett Room at 2:45 and see Stu and other journalists who are going to be talking about newspapers. But to answer your question, I think newspapers did help with writing, but I really ascribe my ability with language more to philosophy than because philosophy requires real clarity and exactitude. But that's my personal philosophy. Any other questions? Yes.
Can you tell us about some of the other things you've written for the...
Oh, absolutely. Out on the table there are the two first books in my budding detective series, the Dakota Stevens Mystery Series. It's about a detective based in Manhattan named Dakota Stevens, and he has a place up here in Millbrook that is his fortress of solitude, yet, you know, all the bad guys always seem to find the place. It's in the Chandler Spencer tradition, so there's a good deal of wisecracking, and I really am an admirer of Chandler and his use of language. So I've been told that the language is really more Chandler-esque. It's kind of a cut above some of the very workmanlike stuff that you see in some mysteries. And also out there on the table is a collection of short stories titled The Man, the Myth, the Legend. And that is about 10 very different men. One is a bootlegger, an African game hunter, a painter, a Civil War general, and they're individual stories, but they're all about these different men, and they have in common male issues, the things that men go through, and love, lust, seeking meaning in their lives. You know, out on the table too is our printouts of some of the critical acclaim that the books have had.
What's the title of that book?
The Man, the Myth, the Legend. Now I'm going to tell you where I got that title. My father had this mug that my mother bought for him, and it's this terrific mug, you know, you get it in a Christmas tree shops or something, and I coveted that mug for the longest time, because it's like the man, the myth, the legend. Every time I go over there to have coffee, I'd be like, I want to take this mug. Oh, that's your father's mug. I'll get you one sometime. So, you know, this went on for years. Finally, my mother got me one of my own. And when I was putting this collection together last year, I was thinking about for a title and opened the cabinet, the man, the myth, the legend. I said, there it is. The only problem is, for example, on Amazon, if you type in the man, the myth, the legend, I think now you'll get my book as the first hit, but for a while, there was the man, the myth, the legend, and there was a porn star. A book about a porn star. That is not the book I wrote. Okay? The man, the myth, the legend has a little Indiana Jones action figure on the front. The John Holmes, I don't know what it has on the front. So.
It sounds like you could use it as a marketing ploy. You should find everywhere else that is
Oh,
on the
send
web
a copy to.
and get it to somehow refer to the book.
Yeah,
Maybe go the other direction.
Well, you know what's interesting is there's another gentleman in Rhinebeck who just published a memoir titled 100 Miles from Manhattan. He lives in Rhinebeck, and apparently it's pretty good. And so Alexis is thinking of contacting him, and the two of us going around and, you know, here's a fictionalized vision of 100 Miles from Manhattan. Here's, you know, his reality, a memoir of 100 Miles from Manhattan.
Oh, that's good.
So, have we reached our limit?
Yeah, we're just about time. You have a couple more minutes. You can take a few more questions.
All right, I just don't want to keep people if they're.
In your earlier works, I noticed there's like lust and emotion, but there's no sex. And this book is like filled with it. So I was wondering if that was a conscious thing or it just came about
You
in
know,
Wellington's story.
You know, here's the thing, you know, one of the character whose piece I just read to you, Peter Ford, he's an editor. And one of the things he remarks about in his chapter, Wellington Trials, is he remarks about a new translation of Anna Karenina. And he says how it's better, but the problem is there's no sex in it. You know, it's just, they're always having these passionate embraces, etc. So one of the things I was trying to do here is push the envelope a little bit, you know. There's nothing X-rated. It's not X-rated by any means. It's not graphic. And I contend that, because ultimately, you know, to describe sex scenes is really kind of, is just ridiculous, because when you come down to it, it's just mechanics, you know, A, B, C, etc. But I think if you read it, you will discover that I present those things artfully or artistically. So I'm very aware of that and make every effort. If I only have sex in the book, though, to further the story. It's only where it's necessary for the story. And one in particular is about a man and woman, a husband and wife, different couples committing adultery, and they, you know, just fall for each other and run into the woods together.
But you did it in such a way that I felt the chemistry. Like I was like, whoa, like you could feel the passion and you were like pulled into it. It gave me goosebumps.
Thank you. That's how we do.
I thought your wife was gonna dye her hair red.
It's too
Oh, I'm sorry.
expensive.
The next person is waiting.
Yes, okay. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your comments. And should you want to, I'll be out at the tent signing copies if you're interested. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, wait, do not go anywhere. At noon, that's 15 minutes from now, at Grace Church, Half Moon Theater Company is doing an encore performance of their sold-out 10-minute play festival. And it's a free chance to see 2 excellent 10-minute plays. So if you have some time and you're interested in theater, go up there and see it. They're the Hudson Valley's resident professional theater company. I've written a play for them. Alexis is a member of the company. They're terrific. So if you are interested, you should go up there. Thank you.